Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and distinguished guests, I have the great pleasure of welcoming all of you, those who are here in person and those who are online at the Institute of the Mediterranean and Oriental Cultures of the Polish Academy of Sciences during the Symposium Borderscapes of Ancient Egypt. From all my heart, I welcome Professor Krzysztof Ciałowicz, who is here with us. And I'm extremely pleased to welcome the staff of our institute, including Professor Karol Myśliwiec, Professor Ewa Laskowska-Kusztal, Professor Barbara Tkaczow, as well as other members of the team of Egyptologists, Nubiologists, and surprisingly, Islam department as well. Not less cordially, I welcome all our guests. On the one hand, the topic of today's symposium is fairly new for research at the Institute. On the other hand, it fits perfectly into the scope of our cultural and archaeological research, which the Institute has been carrying out since its inception and even longer, being the heir of two institutions, the Research Center of Mediterranean Archaeology and the Research Center of Non-European Countries. Dr. Maria Carmela Gatto has worked with us since 2020. She has meanwhile received a grand pulse in the Institute. Her activity, hard work, and commitment are invaluable. Today's conference is the culmination of her research project entitled Egyptian State Formation and the Changing Socio-Spatial of the First Nile Cataract Region in the 4th-3rd millennia BCE, funded by the Norwegian Financial Mechanism 2014-2021 via the Norway grants and by the National Science Center of Poland. I'm very happy that the members of the team are also with us today and will present their papers here. Dr. Oren Ziegel, who participated in the grant, as well as Dr. Jacques Bajot and Dr. Dorian Vanul, who helped Maria create the division in the Institute, having their own grants here. Maria's project has also made it possible to sign a cooperation agreement with the University of Bologna. So, to not prolong too much, I use this opportunity to wish you all successful presentations, as well as interesting and inspiring discussions, or in general, a scientific feast of hungry minds. Thank you very much. And now I pass the mic to Professor Ewa Laskowska-Kusztal.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, dear organizers and participants of the conference concluding the project of Dr. Maria Gatto regarding the southern border of Egypt. I would like to warmly welcome everyone as the head of the department hosting the project of Dr. Maria Gatto and her team. The conference is the culmination of the project, but it's not the end of cooperation with Maria and this important research topic. I would like to express my joy and satisfaction that Dr. Maria Gatto and her team will continue their research in the coming years in the new laboratory division established at our institute in the autumn time, dealing with the borders of Egypt. The new laboratory is an important complement to Nubian research conducted at our institute in the Department of Nubian Studies since 1972. It will be also undoubtedly be a scientific partner of ceramologists working at the institute and our colleagues interested in the ports of the Red Sea and the Eastern Desert. We also expect a revival of contact with Polish rock art researchers. I would like to warmly welcome our distinguished and dear guest and speaker, Professor Krzysztof Ciałowicz. Thank you that you are with us, head of the archaeological mission in Tel Farha. I am deeply satisfied that my dream of confronting the research issue of both borders of Egypt, North and South, at the same moment in the history of the Egypt state is coming true. Thank you, Professor Czałowicz, that you are with us and you offer so important lecture. I am pleased to point out that this confrontation is also included in the title of the conference, the borderlands of ancient Egypt. I see this use of the pluralis as an announcement of a wide spectrum of future research. And finally, I would like to emphasize that as a neighbor from Elephantine, I particularly warmly support the research of Dr. Maria Kim mission. Also, I deal with the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. I can say that many of the research problems analyzed by Dr. Gatto team mission are still valid, and we have the common problems to resolve. I wish everyone a successful and inspiring conference. Thank you very much.
It's easier. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us today here at the Polish Academy of Sciences, but also online. Thank you to all the colleagues, and thank you to Professor Laskowska and Dr. Iwaschuk for the kind presentation, the kind introduction. As you all know, I'm Maria Carmela Gatto, and I'm the PI of the BORDERSCAPE Project. And this symposium marks the end of the project. And it does so by exploring various aspects of the ancient Egyptian borders, from their early forms at the rise of the state to their later developments during Pharaonic, Greco-Roman, and late antique medieval Egypt. Their complexity is approached through the concept of borderscape, the political, cultural, physical, mental, intellectual, and/or spiritual geography where boundaries are located and where the tangible and intangible practice of border making and border maintenance occur. I sincerely hope this will be an exciting and fruitful occasion to share and discuss the results of my project, but also most recent scholarship on ancient Egyptian borderscapes and proposed future avenues for building a field of border studies within Egyptology and related disciplines. I shall take the occasion to thank several people and institutions. First, my appreciation goes to Professor Czałowicz for graciously accepting my invitation to contribute to a keynote lecture to the symposium. And to my colleagues and friends, Dr. Jean Major, Dorian Rangoul, Oran Siegel, Audrey Le, and Katarzyna Delandis-Danis for participating with their latest research to the symposium. The BORDERSCAPE project is founded by the Norwegian Financial Mechanism 2014-2021 via the Norway grants and by the National Science Center of Poland through the Warsaw. The Norway grants and the financial mechanism of the European Economic Area, also known as EE grants, are Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein contribution to a green, competitive, and inclusive Europe. In the period 2014-2021, grants from the Norway grants and the EEA grants amounted to 2,800 million euros, a good part of which was granted to Poland. I will be eternally grateful to Norway and its people for providing me with this opportunity. And I must say, we really hit the inclusive spot with the BORDERSCAPE project. In fact, the project was paid by Norway, implemented in Poland, directed by an Italian, with research executed in Egypt, and a lot of international collaborations in between. So we are really international and inclusive. To strengthen the relationship between Norway and Poland, and hopefully build future collaborations, I have invited here in Warsaw today a student from the Department of Archaeology, Conservation and History of the University of Warsaw, Markus Hagen, who is here. who has an interest in Greco-Roman Egypt and is thinking to use his, for his master dissertation, unpublished data from the Swan Archaeological Project I co-direct in the First Cataract region. So please help him feel welcome today and give him a chance to talk with you about his potential future research. I must say that there is a great scope for collaboration between Poland and Norway in the field of Egyptology and biology. In fact, Poland has a strong tradition of studies in these two fields, while they are less developed in Norway. My gratitude goes also to the National Science Center of Poland and its personnel for their excellent support during the implementation period of the project, and of course to the Institute of Mediterranean and Oriental Cultures of the Polish Academy of Sciences for accepting to host the project. I'm particularly thankful to Jadwiga Iwaschuk, director of the Institute, to Katarzyna Kapiec, Deputy Director, to the former Director, Professor Teodosia Rdzewska, and to Professor Laskowska Pisztal, Head of the Department of Ancient Cultures of Egypt and the Middle East. I cannot, however, forget the great supporting work by the Institute Secretary, Administrative Accounting Divisions, and particularly by Dr. Karolina Baczynska. I found that I know past talented colleagues with whom I have shared joy and desperation during these past 3 years, particularly Dr. Susanna Fidanska and Dr. Wojciech Elsmond. From a more scientific perspective, the Borderscape project has not been a solitary enterprise, but I benefited from the invaluable help of several colleagues. Dr. Oren Siegel, who formerly served as junior researcher with the project, Dr. Serena Nicolini from University of Bologna, and the numerous team members of the Swan Archaeological Project, including its co-director, Professor Antonio Pucci of University of Bologna, all of whom in various capacities contributed in the field and afterwards to the successful completion of the research. An agreement of collaboration was recently signed between IMOPAS and the University of Bologna to strengthen and continue the collaboration started during the Borderscapes project. Thank you to Alessia Brucato of the University of Bari for building the project website, and to Professor Julian Bogdani and his Digital Archaeology Lab at the Sapienza University of Rome for developing, together with Alberto Cia of Yale University, the Borderscape Project Web GIS. I encourage you to check the website and the Web GIS for further details about our project. And please do also watch the series of online seminars we organized in the past year, now available on the YouTube channel of IMOPAS. In the future, the Borderscape website and social media accounts will continue to be updated, reporting on initiatives related to the project. I'm very proud to report that the Borderscape project has developed, in collaboration with the Aswan Archaeological Project and the Nubia Museum of Aswan, a series of educational activities for children dedicated to the rock art of ancient Egypt. Dr. Fatma Keshk was instrumental in translating and adjusting the concept of the activities into colloquial Egyptian, so to be better understood by the children of Aswan. The aim of these activities is for the children to learn of the importance of this less known archaeological dataset and protect it from imminent destruction, which unfortunately is happening now. The First Cataract region is rich in rock art, and you will learn of its pivotal role in the border-making process during mine and Dr. Van Hul's presentation today. Two spin-off projects came out of the Borderscape project, both funded by the Polonese Peace Program of the National Science Center of Poland. One is that of Dr. Pajot, Tecton Pre-Egypt, and the other is that of Dr. Van Hul, Power Art. You will hear more about these two projects soon enough from their PIs. Finally, some technical information about today's schedule. I must apologize for a mistake I made in the program regarding the afternoon session. So be aware that Dr. Delellis Dennis' presentation will start at 4 p.m. followed by a Q&A session. The schedule of the final discussion remains unchanged. Its presentation today will last about 20 minutes and will be followed by 5 minutes Q&A time. The keynote lecture will be followed by a 15 minutes Q&A time. For those online, please write your question on the chat or raise your hand to ask the question yourself. The morning sessions will be chaired by Professor Lascostas-Pustal, the afternoon session by Dr. Kabietz, and I will chair the discussion time. So I think that this is all for me for now, and I thank you again for being here today and for joining us, and let's the symposium begin with me, I guess. So it's still me. Thank you. So everybody who is here, let's split to the director of the Italian Cultural Institute here in Warsaw, who was very kind to joining us today for a short time, but thank you very much. It's really appreciated.
An exceptional occasion, once in a lifetime experience, because the Institute of Culture here never hosted an archaeological exhibition. It's an exhibition of items from Era, from the State Capital, related to the honoring this Italian population that lived there before the Greek colonization. So I want to welcome you all. There at 6 p.m. we start to 8 p.m. with a better serve for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So thank you, Dr. Christie, and I hope that many people will come tomorrow to see the exhibition. So we start with the first session, which is chaired by Professor Lascostas-Pustal.
Good morning. We open morning scientific session. Our first speaker is Maria Carmela Gatto. Maria Gatto is assistant professor.
The Department of Ancient Cultures of Egypt and Middle East of the Institute of Mediterranean and Oriental Cultures, Polish Academy of Science of our institute, the head of Borderlands of Ancient Egypt Research Division, and the principal investigator of the Borderscape Project. Dr. Gatto is an archaeologist specialized in Egyptian-Nubian interaction, who works since 2005 in the First Nile Cataract region as co-director of the Aswan Komombo Archaeological Project. Yeah, la parola a vous, Madame.
Thank you very much, Professor. And so thank you all of you again for being here today and also online. Thank you very much to everybody. And let's start with talking about my project from a more specific scientific point of view. So trying to summarize very quickly the results of 3 years of work. I hope that we all know where my project is located. So the area that I'm taking into consideration, that I was taking into consideration, is the first cataract of the Nile. So we are at the southern border of Egypt, of ancient Egypt, with Nubia. And this area is actually quite a landmark along the Nile Valley, quite central. So it was really a crossroad of people and idea throughout history. The landscape is quite narrow and rocky, and there is this cataract, so these boulders of granite that stops the flow of the river. So it's quite an impressive and dramatic landscape we are dealing with. This area was, which was a natural border, became a geopolitical border from the end of the 4th millennium BCE, when the ancient Egyptian state was created. So the aims of my project, of the Borderscape project, was to detect timing and nature of changes connected with this border
state formation process and bordering process. And so changes in settlement pattern, land use, and community structure during the whole period of borders of state formation. Identified what power performances were set in place by the bordering process, and explore how the process of state formation and border making impacted and transformed also Nubia, so Egypt's southern neighbor. So we are dealing with two different processes here. The state formation process that started before and was more likely unintentional, and the bordering process that was later, so is it is part of the state formation process and more likely was more intentional. The unification date that we now know was around 3,800 BCE, 85 BCE, sorry, has to be intended as a threshold in this long state formation process, but was not the beginning or the end of the process, which lasted much longer, started earlier and finished later. So in this research, I use, let's say, the beginning of a more permanent type of settlement pattern along the Nile as the beginning of this process. So we are at the beginning of the 4th millennium BCE, and I use the collapse of the Old Kingdom at the end of the 3rd millennium BCE as the end of this state formation process. So what do we know about ancient Egyptian boundaries? We know, for instance, that the Egyptians used two different terms, and Dr. Oren Siegel is going to talk about this much longer than me, so I'm just going to say a few words about this. We know that there was a word, tash, that means boundary, frontier, sphere of influence, and it was actively constructed by human, but as a matter of fact, royal agencies. So this is a border that doesn't exist and it's just made by the king most of the time. Gero instead is a term that is used for borders that never change, like natural borders. So the first kind of border is the one that we are more interested in this project. And we can see material evidence of borders for instance, in remains of fortresses, in remains of monumental walls on the landscape, and many stele and rock inscriptions that were marking the landscape of ancient Egyptian borders. So but these are what we know from Pharaonic Egypt. What about the beginning? No? So are these evidence already implemented, all this, let's say, materiality of borders already implemented at the beginning? So what happened at the origin? And why is so important this kind of knowledge? Well, we are all painfully aware of what being bonded by a geopolitical border means and what a nation state and its borders can create in our life. So understanding how this process started at the beginning and maybe also acknowledge that there are different ways of creating geopolitical borders can be also useful in our modern society. So what we did was to collect archaeological data. First of all, we have collected 136 archaeological sites, information from archaeological sites, all managed through a database. And we have divided the, let's say, the chronological period and all the sites in 6 different phases, 3 before the unification and 3 after the unification time. These are according to the, let's say, the relative chronology of ancient Egypt. So we follow that kind of information and also absolute dating that we have available now. But because we also want to know the landscape, so not just, let's say, the archaeological, the remains of sites or the settlement pattern, we are also interested in understanding the landscape of this area. We have collected a lot of information about the landscape itself. For instance, where the wells are in the desert, where caravan roads or desert roads are located. So all this kind of information are very much interesting for us. And to do so, we have used historical legacy data, particularly historical maps of different types, aerial photographies. We have to remember that the southern part of the cataract region is now lost under the Lake Nasser. So the construction of the two dams in Aswan unfortunately created this kind of loss for archaeology and also for landscape archaeology. And so historical data are very much important to use. We have also used geospatial data, new data, and we were very lucky to have a DEM, so a digital elevation model, given to us, provided to us by the German Space Agency, which I thank, in a more official way. So these are the kind of data collections that we have done. But then, and to deal with, let's say, understanding the settlement pattern and the land use is quite straightforward. So you do spatial analysis, you apply, let's say, methodologies connected with landscape archaeology. Much more difficult was to understand how to deal with the social landscape. So do we want to focus on identity and ethnicity? So this kind of research questions, which are, of course, very much important. And it's always very difficult to figure out how to I understand and interpret the material culture that we have in this area that is very much mixed up. So I decided to use a different approach and created a model for community structure. So instead of focusing just on specific elements like identity or ethnicity. So my interest was to see how many community structures were present in the area and how they changed through times. What do I mean with community structure? The structure is composed by different, it's a sort of network, let's say, and it's composed by different nodes, which are the single settlement community. And this network is basically a cultural community. So all this community, this network of communities is characterized by a social world, which is in fact made of different aspects. So you have the domestic sphere, the funerary sphere, the ritual ceremonial sphere, and the material culture. And all of these spheres, all of these aspects are also known as communities of practice. So it's putting together all this kind of information and then identify communities, different kind of community structures that it can tell us much more for this kind of research question that we had. So let's try to go through phase by phase and see how things changes. So the first phase, as you can see, is at the beginning of, let's say, the first half of the 4th millennium BCE. And the sites are here very generally defined. So cemetery, settlements, rock art, and this kind of stuff. So you can see that there are a lot of yellow dots. Rock art is everywhere. And this is only the evidence that we have so far, because it's where the archaeological projects have worked in the area. But you have to imagine that rock art is really everywhere in the desert and along the Nile. So there is definitely much more than we can see on this map. Instead, what we are pretty more or less sure of the number of the sites is what is along the Nile Valley. And as you can see, there is a discrepancy between what the kind of sites that we have north and south of the cataract, because this depends on when the archaeological investigation was done. So south of the cataract 100 years ago, and so they only identified cemeteries. North of the cataract is also current ongoing research, archaeological research, and so you have also settlements that were taken into consideration. So as you can see, there are small dots of settlements and cemeteries spread all over along the Nile, which means that every single valley or piece of land that was available to place a settlement, a small tiny village with a nearby graveyard, that would happen. But this is the first time that we have this kind of settlement pattern in this part of the Nile Valley. Before, we have no evidence of sedentary sites, and we actually have, and these are sites found by the Aswan Komobo Archaeological Project, we have evidence of mobile communities, mobile people in the deserts. For instance, in this case, the Aswan Komobo Archaeological Project has found tombs, tumuli, dated to the 5th millennium, and this kind of structures are clearly connected with nomadic, pastoral nomadic populations of the desert. So the beginning of the 4th millennium is really the first time that we have a community more stably settled along the Nile. So if we move forward to the next phase, so we are around the mid of the 4th millennium, the settlement pattern is more or less the same, so it doesn't change much. So let's see how one of these small villages and nearby cemetery was organized. And I'm going to show you this one here, so north of Aswan, called the Nager Carmila, where the Aswan Komobo Archaeological Project worked some years ago. So this is a small valley, and the settlement is closer to the bottom of the valley, so where the water now during the flood of the Nile in the summertime was arriving, so close to the cultivations. Nearby there are the remains of the tombs of the cemetery, and on top, on the other side of the valley, higher up, there are the remains of the granaries of storage facilities, so far away from the water. The remains of the settlement are very, very ephemeral, so some post holes, emplacement for pots, a sequence anyway of occupational phases. And because it's so ephemeral, the architecture and the organization of the village, there is this idea that maybe these communities were not so settled after all, not so sedentary after all. But as a matter of fact, we try to make some modelings with the Nile floods. So we have some information about historical Nile floods from the end of the 4th millennium. And we have also a lot of information about historical Nile floods from the last millennium. So from the 7th century after Christ up to now, up to the construction of the Aswan dams. And in both cases, if we apply both models, we can see that the village of Nagel Carmila was most of the time outside the reach of the flooding. So this means that even if the village is very small and the architecture inside, the structure inside is very ephemeral, more likely these were communities stable along the Nile all year round. These are some of the tombs that we have found, and there is some variability and also some kind of elements that are typical of this southern part of Egypt and lower Nubia, so the south and the middle Nile region, let's say, and not visible farther north. The material culture is very interesting in these sites because it's very mixed up. So we are at the border with Nubia, and we also have communities roaming the desert, and so there are different kinds of communities here mixing up different traditions also in the material culture, which we are trying to understand. So Jad will tell you more on the pottery, for instance, because we have pottery that is done according to the Nagada, so the Egyptian tradition, pottery that is more local tradition, pottery that is more following more the so-called Nubian tradition. So how to understand, how to interpret this kind of information that we found on the material culture. Rock art, as I said, is quite a lot in the area. So this is a very rich area for rock art. And rock art was symbolic, so it didn't represent, let's say, normal the normal life of the people, but was had a symbolic meaning, very ceremonial and very ritualistic. So in this period of time, in the 4th millennium, most of the rock art had two main, let's say, kind of representations, either ceremonial hunting with mostly desert animals, so something connected with the control of the nature of the desert. And then the other main representation is parades of boats, ceremonial boats along the Nile. So again, rituals, but this time connected with the Nile Valley, with the Nilotic landscape. At the end of this second phase, so we are really approaching the so-called Dynasty Zero time, we see some changes in the rock art. And the first, let's say, symbolism, iconography connected with the kings, so royal iconography, is started to show up in the rock art. So for instance, in this site that again was investigated by the Aswan Komombo Archaeological Project, which if you remember, it's a joint project also with University of Bologna, we found one of the earliest representation of a falcon on top of a shrine of a ceremonial boat. So you all know that a falcon in ancient Egyptian and ancient Egypt has a specific meaning, has the representation of the god Horus, but also as the representation of the king, particularly in these early times. So we already have this kind of iconography so early before the unification time. So let's move to the third phase, which corresponds to the end of the 4th millennium and also the so-called Dynasty Zero. So this is a moment in time where there is a sort of cohesion in Upper Egypt from a power perspective, let's say. And you can see that also in the settlement pattern, we can see some changes. For instance, for the first time, we don't only have small villages scattered all over the place, but we have the development of a central place, a proto-urban center in Elephantine Island, which is modern-day Aswan. So if we go and see what Elephantine Island is, this one, so the site was right at the tip, the northern tip of the cataract, and it develops as an economic hub for Egypt in connection with southern trades with Nubia. And what makes this site different from all the other villages around, apart from the sites, of course, is also what was inside. So we have the first evidence of a temple, a quite weird one, I must say, because it was made of a small space surrounded by granitic boulders, clearly connected with the water of the cataract and the flooding of the Nile. We have the first workshop, evidence of a workshop of pottery and copper. The first evidence of mud brick architecture. So things are changing, no, completely, and also the beginning, a starting of a more industrial production of granite for quarrying, granitic quarries. Again, important evidence comes from the rock art. In this case is another site investigated by ACAP to the left of the river Nile, north of Aswan, is called the Nagalamdulab. And in this case, we have a sequence of panels all connected, and where the pharaoh himself with a white crown of Upper Egypt, a very early version of the white crown, so wearing the white crown, is represented in more than one occasion. So all these representations are basically parts of rituals that we know from later times being connected with the royal jubilee ceremonies. And so it's a very official kind of representation. It's a sort of, kind of representation that you will find later on temples, on the walls of temples. In this case, they are on a natural landscape, in a natural valley, but the attitude, the meaning is very much the same. So the pharaohs, the regality here, the royal power is marking the landscape with these very official representations. The main panel, which unfortunately, as you can see, is pretty much in a very bad shape, was photographed in the 1960s by the famous Egyptologist Labib Habashi. And there's a small inscription here, and which says, according to John Darnell translation, that the nautical following of Horus, so the court and the king, arrive in a place called Panther or Partenskin town for taxation. So we are giving also very important information also from an economic point of view and the organization of the state. So we are right before the unification time, and this valley here, north of Aswan, was very much used by the central power to mark and to create this kind of power performance in this area. On top of the valley, so on the plateau overlooking the valley of Nagel Abdullab, recently ACAP has found a stone feature that you can see here, which actually is composed of two different enclosures. So a larger one with a tomb and some pits for offerings, unfortunately all plundered, so not much left in place, and a smaller enclosure with another tomb inside. The pottery that we found in the larger enclosure is Egyptian, but also Nubian in tradition, and it goes from let's say a date, a chronology point of view from, let's say, the mid 4th millennium till the end, which means that the tomb probably was earlier, was mid 4th millennium, then there was reused or some activities around. This area here to the south of the two enclosures was packed full of shards of Nile Sea, very roughly made pottery that is dated to Dynasty 0 or a little bit earlier. And there were bowls, proto-bread molds, beer jars, so all objects that you would have used, for instance, during offerings, ritual offerings to the deceased. Now, the fact that, and they are later in time, so clearly the tombs were older and this kind of offerings were later in time. The fact that we have also Nubian pottery and the kind of architecture that we can see of these tombs clearly say that these are not Egyptian tombs, Nagada, let's say tombs. These are more likely connected with communities of the desert, nomadic communities of the desert. So somebody that was important enough for them to do this kind of tombs in a special place for them, because there is no other, let's say, tombs that we have seen around, at least so far. On top of this kind of special place for nomadic communities, we can see that the Pharaonic power or the pre-dynastic, proto-dynastic power is arriving and including and using this kind of evidence, so entangling with this kind of evidence to create something new, no? So to perform and produce something new. And as a matter of fact, close to the smaller enclosure, to the smaller tomb, we have found this plaquette, which more likely was part of a bracelet like this one down here. And this one was found in a First Dynasty royal tomb in Abydos of King Jer. So we have to imagine something similar. And probably there was some statuette at the top of this plaquette. We cannot say if it was a falcon like in the first dynasty example. We cannot say that this is a serek, so a palace facade like we have in the later example. What we can say that this kind of evidence tell us that the people that were going there to do offerings were not probably of the local elites, but probably somebody coming from, you know, from abroad, from outside, and very much connected with the kind of activities that are represented in the rock art of Nagel Hamdullab. So there is really a sort of creation of a landscape of power using the an important special place of other people, using it to become, you know, part of this royal propaganda or power performance at this place. So let's move on after the unification, and you can see that the settlement pattern clearly has changed. So apart from some yellow dots of rock art everywhere is, I mean, still visible, but not so much as before. We can see that not many dots are left. Important, we have not only a central place as urban center in Elefantine, but now we have also a urban center farther north in Comombo. So clearly we have to assume that there was a clusterization of the people living in the area in these central places. So no more small villages, but all the communities clustered in one place. And this is pretty common also in other areas of Upper Egypt. In this period, the town of Elefantine, of course, grow in size, but also in complexity, and fortress was built during the first dynasty, and then an enclosure wall around the town. The next phase, so we are in the early Old Kingdom, mid-3rd millennium, let's say, and we can see that again, there is not much going on outside Elefantine and Comombo. And also the rock art seems to be less. What we can see are the appearance of these white dots, who actually are rock inscriptions. So there is a switch between rock art drawings and rock inscriptions sign, so writing that follows the unification time. Elefantine again as another improvement with the construction of a small pyramid and an economic, let's say, building nearby, administrative complex. And at this moment in time, we have also a quite consistent evidence of an industrial production of granite from the area of modern-day Aswan, so the ancient Siene, which was right in front of the town of Elefantine. So this area is full of granite, and we can see that at least from the 4th dynasty, we have evidence of this huge, let's say, huge scale production. So also the use of the landscape is changing. No, this is a very rocky area, so of course quarries are the main economic, let's say, production. So what do we have to understand from this settlement pattern? Was there anybody else around Elefantine? Was the region empty, with just the people living inside the major cities? As a matter of fact, no. So a survey by ACAP has shown that there are evidence of small campsites of nomadic communities. So there were people living around, moving, so not stable along the Nile. And these kind of communities, as the pottery can tell us, are very much connected with the south. So these are, let's say, Nubian type, Nubian style decorations. The late Old Kingdom, so we are at the end, let's say, of this first state of ancient Egypt, and also at the end of the 3rd millennium, we see that the settlement pattern changes again, particularly to the south. So you see all these purple dots, which are cemeteries. So it seems that few tombs maybe, so maybe it seems much more than it actually was, but there are few tombs coming back. So some people coming back. And these people are not the same as before. So before the unification, during the 4th millennium, all these villages along the Nile were all the same, like the one that I showed you before. This moment in time, these communities that resettled the Lower Nubia, so the area south of the cataract, after a moment where there were no settled communities in this area, so they came back to be more mobile and went back somewhere else. They resettled again, but they are not of the same community structure, of the same network that we have seen before or that has developed in Egypt during this moment in time. So these communities are known in archaeology as the C group culture. So they have different type of graves, different type of settlements, different material culture. So they are completely a new community structure, a new network of communities. So you can see that there is some quite important change through times. Of course, the town of Elephantine is getting always larger, and for the first time also the temple dedicated to the goddess Satet has been used by the pharaohs, so enlarged by royal agency. We are at the end of the Old Kingdom, a critical moment for the political for politics. So this is the moment where the state collapses, the central state collapses, and this is the first time that we have evidence of royal inscriptions in the area, where for the first time a king of the 6th dynasty tell us that that was its border, because he said that he's going to meet the leaders of the other lands at the end of his land. So it's the first time that this is clearly stated. So what can we take out of all of these results? First of all, that sedentarization can be taken as starting point and collapse can be taken as closing event for the state formation process, at least in this area. The moments of discontinuing settlement pattern, the major moments are during Dynasty 0, so before the unification, and during the early and late Old Kingdom, so after the unification. The industrial quarry production probably developed particularly during the period after unification. Ritual performances are what were set in place for the first time during Dynasty 0. So this is the ritual part, and the ritual part is particularly shown in the rock art. So rock art is used in this kind of, so not the so famous boundary steles of later times, but rock art. And there is a lot of interplay also with the mobile communities. The community structure changed dramatically. So we can see 2 community structures in the 4th millennium, and then we have at least 3 community structures later in the 3rd millennium. So this is a major change also within the Egyptian community structure. And what it comes back to us is that borders for ancient Egyptians were permeable landscapes, and they were constantly altered by royal action. So there was not an idea of blocking people and leave people outside. That was not the point. Every pharaoh could change a border, and actually they did. So it was more fluid, a fluid concept. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. It was excellent. It was extremely interesting. And I have impression that we have to discussion for this 1 hour afternoon, because it was so rich that we have to run to our next speaker. Many thanks.
Thank you.
It was excellent, Maria. Resume of your work since 2005 and so go down. Merci. And now I invite Jade Barrault. Jacques Barrault currently is an assistant professor in our institute and the principal investigator of a Polonaise bis project titled Technopregi, which investigates ceramic technology in the socio-political environments of pre-dynastic Egypt. As a prehistorian and ceramic specialist, Jacques collaborates with various international projects in Egypt, focusing on the technological analysis of pottery assemblages.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for coming. First of all, I would like to thank Maria for inviting me to present today and to contribute to this study day or symposium about borders, and also to thank the Institute Chopin for hosting this event. Today, with this presentation, I will speak about the technological approach and how it can contribute in the analysis of borders, both visible and invisible. And for this purpose, after a presentation of the approach, I will mainly focus on one case study that is coming from my project that is taking place here at Chopin, thanks to a scholarship called Polonaise bis, and that is financed by the European Commission and by the National Science Center of Poland. So let's start with a little presentation of the method. The technological analysis of pottery aims at analyzing ceramic assemblages in my case, but we can apply it to any kind of archaeological material in terms of tradition. And with tradition, we mean a recurrent way of doing that is transmitted from generation to generation within a determined social group. In the particular case of ceramics, here you can see this scheme showing you how we can make a specific type of pot using several different techniques. So we can obtain exactly the same results by molding, for example, or otherwise using the wheel, or using the coiling technique, or otherwise percussion techniques. So what is interesting is that the techniques adopted to make a pot do not determine the final shape, let's say. This means that technical traditions are very strictly linked to the identity of the potters that make them. And so the identification of the technical traditions allows to highlight the social groups to which the potters belonged. After this first identification, we can follow the diffusion of these technical traditions geographically. So here, for example, you have an example map coming from Arizona in this case, showing you how we can plot on the ground the diffusion of specific traditions. So on the right, you have the coil and scrape technique, and on the left, the paddle and anvil. So consequently, we can, for example, study the interaction between these technical traditions, and also more interesting to follow them and mainly to follow their evolution over time. Considering that technical traditions are extremely lasting, extremely stable, because as they do not influence the final shape of the pot, it's something that changes very, very slowly. And normally we have a big change in the transmission of technical tradition, just in case of major social or political changes. I mentioned social group to which the potters belong. So what do we mean with social group? This can have several nuances, let's say, and it depends on the archaeological context. Normally, it's the analysis of the archaeological context that allows to determine what kind of, which kind of social group we are dealing with. So as, for example, you can have clans, tribes, factions, a caste, a subcaste, a lineage, a professional community, an ethnic community, something based on different languages spoken, or otherwise even to gender. For example, we can have a technical tradition that is transmitted only by women to women, and other ones transmitted only by men to men. All this information, of course, are based on experimental psychology and ethnographic studies. And to give you just a little example here, you can see an example from a study conducted by Gilbert that studied the technical traditions of the middle valley of the Senegal River. And she analyzed in particular these pots that you can see here in the photos, and performing the technological analysis, she noticed that exactly the same pot shapes were realized using two different techniques, tradition 1 and tradition 2 that you can see here. Now, after noticing this difference, she could interview, so in her case she was lucky as she could interview the potters that made them, and she discovered that tradition 1 was the typical tradition of that village that was performed by women there, and the second tradition was coming from an area, from a region nearby, and was taken to the village under study by women that arrived there because of marriages. She married local men, and so they adapted themselves to the production of local pots that were the ones in use in that specific village, but they adopted their own way of doing them. Just because, again, psychological studies show that after a long training, the trainee is acquiring some specific motor skills, so way of doing gesture, that after it's very, very difficult to change. And that's why normally they are maintained over time, to the contrary of shapes that change normally on the basis of the requests of the users. How do we do this study? We basically look for manufacturer traces that are on the surfaces of the pots, but also we study the fresh fractures of sherds. So normally we refresh the sherds, and here you can see some experimental examples showing you different coil techniques. So that's basically what we look for when we analyze these sherds at the naked eye and with the binocular microscope. And mainly it's based on the orientation of inclusions, pores, etc. It's an approach that it's very, very easy to implement on excavations because it's basically not so expensive, as we don't need, beside a binocular microscope, we don't need special equipment. In the case of museum collections, it's a bit different because as we are not allowed to break pots in museum collections, fortunately, we have to find another way to analyze the radial sections of pots, and in this case is the CT scan microtomography that is non-destructive and that allows, as you can see there in that photo, to see the internal structure of the fabrics, and so to perform an analysis that is comparable to the one that we make on the shirts. And now that we saw together the premises of this approach, let's see the case study. In particular, for my project, I worked on several museum collections and materials coming from excavations. And in particular, today, I'm showing to you the preliminary results coming from the analysis of the assemblages from Nagel Carmila settlement and necropolis that Maria showed you before during her presentation. What is exceptional with these two sites is that we have a settlement and a necropolis instead of having just necropolises as we are normally accustomed for the predynastic periods. And it's these two sites are that are contemporary, are the southernmost well-preserved Nakadan sites, so that was possible to investigate, that were excavated recently. And also being just a little community that apparently it's not directly involved by the very fast developing elites that we can, for example, see in Hierakonpolis and Abydos, so in the region more to the north. We can also have a bottom-up approach, allowing us to just study what seems to be just a simple little community. The chronology of the settlements and necropolis ranges more or less between Naqada 1A, 2A, and with a second phase, Naqada 2D, 3A, that is more superficial. So today I will mainly focus on the more ancient one. And in total, I analyzed a bit less than 4,000 sherds and complete pots. And it was possible to identify 3 technical traditions. And that's already surprising, considering that we are dealing with a very small village and we have 3 different ways of producing pottery. These 3 groups are the shale, the NAC, and the MNR, that stands for Middle Nile region. The names have been chosen to recall those known in literature and so to make it a bit easier to follow the work. The first one, the shale, it's a pottery that is made with a material that is available in the region, shale clay, that has a big variability in fabric. So as you can see, it can be more or less coarse and it's quite random. So we don't have the choice of a coarser fabric for larger pots and a better fabric for small pots, but it's completely random. And the chaîne opératoire used to make mainly red polished bowls and big deep bowls, probably used for cooking, is the coiling technique. So these pots are made from bottom to the rim with coils that are assembled with a technique that gives in section, you can see it there, oblique coil junctions that are very typical. After this first rough out of the shape with the coils, the shape is finished by scraping the clay when it's still wet. And finally, the pot could be slipped and burnished, and that's the case of the little red polished bowls, otherwise simply smoothed. Then we have the NAC group, in our case for this early phase only represented by the famous black-topped pottery and red polished. That again, is made with finer fabric, so we have the choice of a quite pure type of clay. But as the group we saw before, we have the vases that are completely built with coils. And again, we can observe a gesture that allows to obtain these oblique coils that you always have the same reconstruction that are well visible in radial section. After this first stage, we have a finishing of the shape with the shaving technique that is different from the scraping, because in this case we are working, there you can see reconstruction to give an idea, we are working on leather hard clay, so it's more dry. And with a sharp tool, we cut slices of clay to obtain the final shape. And that's very, very characteristic of this production, and we find it for until the beginning of the Old Kingdom. These pots could be finished in 2 ways. They were slipped and fired in an oxidizing atmosphere to obtain completely red pots. Otherwise, they could be fired with a specific technique that we're not recalling today, that allows to obtain a black rim and a red body. And we arrive to the third group, the MNR, that is mainly represented by black-mouthed open forms with more or less globular shapes. And in this case, like the group before, this ceramic is made with Nile clay. That is a little, as you can see in the photo, less refined. We have lots of different minerals inside and tiny quantities of plant remains. But again, the first stage of forming the pot is again based on the coiling technique. And again, in radial section, we have always these oblique junctions. Then the second part of the manufacture is based on a percussion step that sees the obtention of the final shape by beating the inside of the pots and putting them on holes in the ground or in some forms on which a mat, vegetal mat, is laid. And that's witnessed by the very typical ripple that we can find on these pots, that is sometimes very well visible at the naked eye, otherwise it's only visible with lateral light. Finally, these pots were finished by a slip that is not covering, so probably it was put with some kind of brush. And in this case too, we have a particular firing technique that allows to obtain a black inside surface and a red outer surface. So to sum up, we have 3 technical traditions in this small village. All of them have a common first phase for building the vase that is based on this specific coiling technique. And then they all diversified the second stage, as we have the knack that has a shaving stage, the shale that has a scraping stage, and finally the MNR that has a percussion phase. So this preliminarily, we have an hypothesis that these 3 groups probably have a common origin that we should look for in the 5th millennium. But of course, that's an hypothesis that should be tested by enlarging the analysis to material from the 5th millennium, and in particular by analyzing the Badarian material. So maybe it will be for another Polonaise. Then what is interesting, as I was mentioning before, is that in this area, in the Aswan area, we have the overlapping of these 3 technical traditions. And in particular, in Nagar Carmila, most of the assemblage, at least in the settlement, is composed of this knack group and shale that constitutes respectively 40% and 50% of the assemblage. What does it mean? The idea, also in accordance with studies made in Adaima and Hierakonpolis, the knack tradition could witness a production that is typical, a tradition that is typical of the Nile Valley, and that starts in the domestic context and develops in a specialized production. And with specialized, I mean long time consuming, because to obtain these pots, it takes quite a long time and good technique. And finally, that later in time develops really a kind of workshop production. In the case of the shale, this seems more to be a domestic production, mainly aimed at producing cooking pots. And in this case, there are 2 ideas. The first one is that this could be a tradition that developed in this area, in the Aswan area, where this material is available. Otherwise, it's a tradition that comes from the western deserts and the oases. And that's because in that area, in the same time and in the 5th millennium, we have ceramics made with this shale clay. The technique seems similar, but again, as we said before, in this case too, it would be necessary to enlarge the analysis and so go looking for these ceramics coming from the oasis and see if the technique to make them is the same. And finally, the third group, these black-mouthed jars that also seem to be a kind of specialized production developing again in the domestic context. So long time consuming type of production that in the settlement is represented only by 3% of the assemblage. Possibly in the necropolis we have more, but today I'm not presenting you the percentages because we still have to work on the stratigraphic organization of the cemetery. probably in the cemeteries more, and it seems to be, it witnesses another different tradition and seems to be the result of very tight connections of these communities with the possibly mobile groups that are in the real vicinity. A particularity of Nagel Carmila is that we found some hybrid shirts. There are not so many, we have 3 or 4 that have been analyzed previously by Maria and interpreted as pots made according to the Nakadan tradition, but customized, let's say, with this typical Nubian decoration, the milled rim, to satisfy the local community. But in reality, performing the technological analysis, the situation appears a bit more complex, because we have a fabric that is not the one used normally for the NAC group. It's coarser with little vegetal fragments. We have a slightly bumpy surface and also this non-covering slip that reminds of the shale group. And finally, the Nubian decoration. So apparently we have a mix of the 3 traditions in this case that could be, again, typical of this settlement located in an area far from the elite centers, and so that is probably more real, and also where we have, as Maria underlined it before, a more fluid situation. To conclude, I would like to point out that these results find some comparisons in the Delta, where I worked for years before this new adventure in southern Egypt, and in particular in the Delta. It was possible to highlight a big technical tradition that is the one that I called the LEC, that is diffused all over the Delta and that is based on the pinching technique, that is the one you can see above, and that really constitute 90% of the assemblages of the predynastic period. So 90% of the pottery in all the sites of the Delta, the ones that are analyzed, I'm sorry, are made according to this technique. But until this study, the fibrous, so-called fibrous ceramic was always interpreted as a typical production of the Delta. Performing the technological analysis, we saw to the contrary that is made according to a completely different champ opératoire that you can see below. So you can see in comparison the 2 possible gestures adopted to make this ceramic, and you can clearly visualize that they were made according to different methods. So for the fibrous ware that was concentrated in the Western Delta, in particular in the settlement of Buto, where it's very common, we elaborated an hypothesis and a provocation also, that sees this fibrous ware as the result of mobile communities that are not documented in any other way, that were probably located in the Western Delta and that had strict relationship with the settlement of Buto and also with other settlements of Egypt. So to conclude, the anthropological reading that we achieved with this technological analysis of several sites of Egypt, of predynastic Egypt, show that possibly the social landscape of Egypt was much more complex than what we considered until recently, with always this traditional duality of Upper and Lower Egypt, because we have at least 5 different technical traditions, and also the methodology in general proved to be particularly useful in contributing in understanding, in the frame of this symposium, the social complexity in borderscape areas, and especially in pre- and proto-historic periods where we don't have texts or other means to help us to better understand the situation. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks. We have a lot of specialists working with pottery, but I'm afraid that it's not time for one question, for two.
Thank you very much for your fascinating talk. I love it really. I have a very technical question. How many samples you had to collect to analyze and reach those conclusions?
Okay, yes. I forgot to say during the presentation that that's a method that works if it's implemented on as much sites as possible, because it works on a geographical scale normally, and also on long timelines. So to see the evolutions, because as I was mentioned before, it's something that evolves very slowly, so it's better to have a long scale. And normally it's always good to have a good number of samples. I cannot tell you how many because it depends on the settlements and on the quality of the material you have. But normally, in my cases in Egypt, I have thousands of samples, mainly because you're not so lucky to find traces on every shirt, as normally ceramic, but every manufacturing procedure, you have every step erases the one before, so you have to hope for pieces that are not so well made, and so you can so with several shirts you can finally reconstruct the whole chaîne opératoire. So the more you have, the better it is. But for example, in the cases of museum collections, if you have complete pots and you can do the X-rays microtomography, in that case also a smaller number of samples can be enough.
Okay, maybe we can move to the next presentation. Thank you, Jade.
By the third speaker from our institute, it's Dorian van Huel. Dorian currently is an assistant professor in our institute and the principal investigator of the Power Art Project, founded again by the Polonaise program. Dorian is an archaeologist specializing in rock art with extensive field experience and international collaboration both in Egypt and Sudan. His Power Art project aims at investigating how rock art of Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt was used by the rising socio-political elites to express and convey their power during the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE. The title of the speech, it's rock art as mediator between time and space, manifesting borderscapes in Egypt before the Old Kingdom.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you very much to the whole institute, the Ixchiopine, and all the team for organizing this very stimulating study day, workshop about borderscapes. And it is indeed very stimulating because borderscapes, the way I understand it, at least, calls for a very a holistic approach of the material. It's about archaeology, but we also have to take into account visual studies, iconography, geology, geomorphology, geography. And this is something that people working on rock art shares with those working on borderscapes, because when you are dealing with rock art, you are dealing with, of course, images, so visual studies, but also the archaeology, because you have to understand the area where this specific rock art is placed, and also the geology of the place. So it is a very complex and challenging field of study, and Borderscape is too. And I would like to somehow show how work art can contribute to a problematic such as Borderscape. Because rock art, one of the main means of rock art is to fix a message on an unmovable place, something that is placed in a specific place at a given time, but that can be modified through time. So it's somehow organic, it's living. This message, it can be modified and can be reactivated or deactivated over generations. And so it changed the landscape, it's transformed it. And by doing so, it has an impact on this borderscape problematic, because it modified the landscape and it shapes territories. In other words, it's a perfect case of study somehow when you are dealing with borderscapes, because rock art somehow helps identifying political, cultural, physical, mental, intellectual, and or spiritual geographies when boundaries are located. And when it comes to the concept of frontiers and border in Egypt, the original establishment of Egypt administrative borders, it remains largely elusive in the archaeological record, of course. We know what is the result, the Pharaonic territory of Egypt, the land, but the whole process behind it, at least the original one, we don't know much about it. But the very nature of kingship implies the existence of a delimited territory, thus of frontier and or borders. And what I would like to show here, it's a distinction between the frontier, conceived as a limit that can be natural, the seas, the mountains, or things like that, or man-made, but frontier that can be very fluctuant, that can be moved. Border, it's the other way I would like to understand it today, is this time a limit which is placed into an administrative system, which is placed into in a state context, I would say. So the border, which is institutionalized, which is established by the king, and which needs very fixed and understood limits because of border stelae or things like that. And when we are dealing with prehistory, of course, the state doesn't exist yet. Egypt doesn't exist yet. Those borders, in fact, those official borders doesn't exist yet. So what was the situation? Or could we understand the Egyptian and the Sudanese, so Lower Nubian territory, before the formation of the state, before the establishment of those official borders? And when we are considering Egypt and Lower Nubia during the 4th millennium BC, so basically the pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods, the current narratives focus on the dominant archaeological, cultural assemblages. The most famous one is the Nakadans, of course. But however, they are, and Maria already introduced that complexity, they are only major archaeological manifestations of a much more complex socio-ecological landscape. First, they were not alone, those Nakadans, or those A group of Lower Nubia. And they were, because they was in both regular and close contact with pastoralists and nomads, most of them of Nubian affiliation, in fact, that were roaming the desert between Egypt and Nubia and crossing the valley, of course. But also because none of these entities were fully homogeneous in terms of identities, cultural preferences, etc. So if I mention this now without entering into too much detail, it's because I would like to add some nuance in the common view that all pre-dynastic rock art in Egypt, and especially in the desert, as we will see, was made by the Nakkadans of Upper Egypt. There was a variety of possible authors, and this implies a variety of functions and meanings for this rock art. But fortunately, pre-dynastic iconography informs us on the visual discourse of the elites of Egypt during the pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods. The elites, and then the first rulers, of course, and then the first kings. And it gives us the most, iconography gives us the most important visual symbols that were used at that time. And among those symbols, of course, the boat is very, very much important. And this maps here shows you the main rock art clusters that have been identified in Egypt as far as the 4th millennium BC is concerned. And of course, this map only presents you an image of the current state of research, but even if we consider, for example, all the rock art that has been documented, but that is not yet published, for example, this map will remain very much the same. And it is interesting to note that those main clusters in the Nile Valley, they are located in very strategic areas of the Nile Valley. They are located where the main entry gates to the valley from the desert are situated, so the main wadis, and not too surprisingly, the main archaeological sites, the main center of powers back then, Nakada, Hierakonpolis, El Kab. And so one might then wonder if rock art, or at the very least, what appears to be official rock art productions, and I won't have time today to describe how we can tentatively identify a rock art production as an official one or not, but it deals with a combination of criteria, of course, typology, techniques, thematic, etc. But if we consider the official productions, could we, for example, say that rock art play a role in controlling the access routes towards the desert, or those entry routes that are connecting the valley with the desert? And so, in order to address that question, which is one among many others, I propose to have a look on what we have, going from the early pre-dynastic up to the early dynastic period. And as far as the pre-dynastic is concerned, so the Nagada 1, 2, I would say, it's quite complex and difficult to provide clear and easy answer, because pre-dynastic engravings in the Nile Valley, I will start with the Nile Valley and then going towards the desert. This rock art is extremely diversified, and it consists of depictions of animals, boats, human figures. Images are often isolated or gathered in complex accumulations made over generations, and it is extremely complex to identify the motivations behind their authors. And the frontier between local groups back then in the Nile Valley, they were very, very fluctuant, of course. They were fast changing, and this during all prehistory. So these images could have played various and non-exclusive functions, marking a territory, expressing a symbolic and or spiritual concept, etc. In a way, back then, the whole Nile Valley, so during the most prehistory and until the end of the pre-dynastic period, it was a huge borderscape, where cultural, physical, mental, intellectual, and or spiritual geographies, once again, to take the definition of the borderscape, were created and dismantled following the destiny of the human groups crossing the area. In the desert, and especially the eastern desert, the situation is globally the same, of course, but with a different dimension, as pre-dynastic Nile Valley dwellers were not living there, of course, and some of these images probably ensured the appropriation of important areas of the desert, and perhaps also played an apotropaic role by extending the concept of order and control, which was very important for the Nakkadans. It's at the core of the Nakkadan iconography, this concept of order and control, as Mart will be during the Pharaonic period in the Pharaonic system. This goal, this is linked with this concept bring by John Darnell a few years ago that consider those rock images made by pre-dynastic people as images that could ensure the nilotization of the desert, the socialization of the desert. It's a way to control it, to make it more reassuring somehow. And so they would mark the landscape with images that delimitate some path or territories there in the desert. And those frontiers were both material, because there's an image there, it's physical, but at the same time it's symbolic. And perhaps already was it perceived, this work art, as somehow performative. That is to say that it was magically, it was active in a permanent way there. And when this work art in the desert is located near quarries or mines that were already exploited during the 4th millennium BC, work art could also tentatively be associated with then pre-dynastic expeditions, economic expeditions, just as during the Pharaonic period. The difference there is that during the Pharaonic periods, you have inscriptions linked with these expeditions. During the pre-dynastic, you would have images used as a means of expression, used as a means of conveying discourses and ideas and symbols. And I used here an image of the pre-dynastic rock art in the Wadi Hammamat, so near the quarries, the Grerak quarries in the Wadi Hammamat, which is a very peculiar place with a rock art that is kind of different of what we have in the Central Eastern Desert. There are lots of differences, and it's an ongoing work right now. But that is also to show that depending on the context, the work art will be different, and so the meaning of this work art will be different, and it's impossible to bring one single explanation to this work art. One interesting observation that has been made, and it's been confirmed more and more as we progress, and Maria already introduced it, is that by the proto-dynastic and the early dynastic period, classical pre-dynastic rock art progressively diminished, both in the desert and in the Nile Valley, and it gave way to strategically located productions. Most of them restricted to the Nile Valley. In fact, there's some sort of going back from the desert and a constant concentration in the Nile Valley, and it's desert hinterland. And those early dynastic rock compositions, they are less numerous than the thousands of pre-dynastic engravings, and they testify to a change in the way rock art was used. It became a tool for the elite and first kings to communicate, to mark the landscape, and to affirm their power in now a more structured and institutionalized context. And by then, the way the desert was used changed also, most probably, because those deserts, the eastern deserts, but the western desert also, were open worlds, of course. And they were counting many entry gates into the valley, and it was probably becoming a problem for the forming state. And the need for controlling their main access roads must have emerged during the state formations, and probably, in fact, even before it. This mission was difficult, of course, to achieve, and possibly implied the apposition on non-equivocal markers of ownership in strategic locations. One of those unequivocal markers, of course, during the early dynastic period is the Seher, so this palace facade in which the name of the king is inscribed and the falcon god hovers above it. And we have some of them in the eastern desert that are so conveying the royal discourse far into the Eastern deserts, and so in a very different way than what was done during the pre-dynastic, because then the goal is most probably to mark the ownership, to extend the sphere, the royal sphere of influence inside the Eastern desert. And another point of interest, but which is unfortunately impossible to address, is the current state of in the current state of knowledge is the presence of guard posts in the desert, so military implantations in the desert by the proto-dynastic and early dynastic periods, which, if they existed, might also have been accompanied by rock carvings. And in that context, I show you here, just to go out of the Eastern desert and going into the Western one, in the Theban hinterland, showing you this rock art, which shows hunters in uniform, I would say, just like what we could see on the hunter's palette. And it is another example of the change that occurred by the pre-dynastic and by the end of the pre-dynastic and at the beginning of the proto-dynastic period, is that we don't have isolated image anymore. We have compositions, complex compositions describing precise elements of discourse. Here we have hunters or military person in a location which is very much strategic, because this Theban Western hinterland of Thebes were used to somehow cut short the Kenna band, because if you follow the Nile, you have to make somehow a long road because of this bend. If you cross by the desert, it's shorter, and so these roads behind the Western area of Thebes was very much strategic by then. And so you have a lot of rock art there, and proto-dynastic rock art linked with power, with elites, and with this idea of controlling a very specific place. And that leads me to the royal circle at Nag el Hamdulab, which has already been introduced by Maria, and that allows me to go a little bit faster here. What is interesting with this rock art is, of course, the link with power, the link with the beginning of royalty in Egypt. But what is far more interesting today is the latest discoveries that has been made there, and it shows the importance of combining rock art with archaeology, of course, and not doing rock art just for the iconography and the images, but combining it with what we have archaeologically around, because this link between this funerary complex that has been found, and Maria shows it this morning, which is linked with people coming from outside, linked with pastoralists and nomads, and with Lower Nubia especially. And this mixture of Lower Nubian and Upper Egyptian material in that place, all of that associated with this royal cycle, which is well dated to the Nagatri Heibi period, so the dynasty 0, so we are before the formation of the state. This shows that rock art, once again, was not necessarily or systematically associated with the Akkadians and with Upper Egypt, but that also rock art was used to modify the landscape, to transform it in something that is sacred, that is liminal. And this notion of liminality is very much linked with the notion of borderscape, because, of course, liminality is the idea that a place gather all the ideological, symbolic core roots of a group, of a culture. And here you have that at Nag el Hamdulab, but it's very difficult to understand which culture we are talking about, because it's a mixture of human groups, and it underlies the complexity of what was present there back then during the early dynastic, during the proto-dynastic period. And so in this case, rock art was used as a marker of a processional landscape, because if you follow Nag el-Hamdulab, there's a progression, you know. There's a line of sites that are organized there, and which may most probably be more extended that we know today. That's works that still needs to be done, but most probably Nag el-Hamdulab was not isolated as it seems to be now. It was part of something bigger, of something larger back then. So there's an evolution. That's what I'm trying to show, from the pre-dynastic until the proto-dynastic and early dynastic, with a rock art that was used to mark the landscape, but in a very active way during pre-dynastic, because all of these groups were moving a lot, appearing, disappearing, etc., which is why it's so difficult for us to grasp it, this pre-dynastic rock art. But by the proto-dynastic and early dynastic, things tends to be more concentrated into this idea of royal power and delimiting fixed borders now, which was not the case before. And another example, so processional, religious limits with Hamdulab, for example, but also political one. Here we are at Sheikh Utman, so it's a few kilometers north of Helkab, with a very large panel, which can be seen from the main road, the main modern roads, or from the Nile, basically. It's like a big advertised sign, which has been reactivated through time, from the late pre-dynastic up to the end of the first dynasty. So it goes from the top left until the lower right, as far as those different phases are organized. I don't have the time to enter into to describe those different phases, but it's mainly based on both typology. And you have these boats, for example, phase 3, that are very similar to those at Hamdulab, for example. And every phase respects the previous one. So this is this progression we can see today. And we go from, I would at the late pre-dynastic up until the last king of the first dynasty, here with the Serer of Ka. So it's a very nice example of this use of rock art in a political context, in a way of marking the landscape and to reactivate it generation over generation, so to ensure the continuity of this message. This is also what has been found by Pierre Tallet in the Sinai, for example, in a very political context, once again, because these rock engravings have been found in Wadi Ameira, so just near the mines of turquoise and copper of Serabit el Khadim. And so you have boats, once again, the state boat with the Seher, the name of the king, and it goes from Dynasty 0 up to the end of Dynasty 2. Once again, the idea there is to mark the landscape, but to ensure the ownership of the place by those different kings. And the different expeditions that went there, we affirm those messages. And one last example, which is the famous Gebel Sheikh Suleiman rock panel, also in Lower Nubia, which is understood today as the description of a military victory. Usually, it is described as an Egyptian victory of a local population in Nubia, but it can also be understood as somehow a border stela, marking the limit of the sphere of influence, once again, of the first dynasty kings in Lower Nubia. And with that, we are entering this, the way rock art will be used during the Pharaonic period as a way to witness of activities that were done somewhere, so economic expeditions or border stelae, and this is what is new, I would say. This is the change in the way rock art was used from if you compare with what was done during the pre-dynastic period. And this panel, just before ending, it's something that was done as a very preliminary basis of reflection a few years ago, but it's also a way to insist on the fact that there are no one explanation. There are no one easy answer when you are dealing with rock art. Depending on the time, depending on the place, depending on the context, all the different hypotheses you can make will change. So strategic locations, it's a very broad description of most of the places where pre-dynastic rock art can appear, and it can be the result of social interactions, the will of expressing ideological and political messages, etc. Communal locations or liminal sites, it's once again something else. It's like Nagalam Dulap, for example. Target sites, it is place in the landscape that attract engravers, that attract rock art because it is convenient or because it is visible, and so it is a very suitable place to express those messages. And then you have the border stelae, which appear during the early dynastic period, because you are in a context when those kings need to delimitate their territory for the first time. So, to conclude, rock art is an act of transformation of the landscape, a way to humanize it, a way to bring it into your sphere of influence and to express messages and discourse that are part of your ideological roots, I would say. And during most of the pre-dynastic period, rock art is not systematically synonym of placemaking. It's not necessarily systematically a way to delimit a territory. It's just a way to express an idea at a very specific time in a very specific context. And then all of that was behind this motivation disappeared very quickly. It allows to move places and ideas from one core place to another. And usually, if you are in the desert, for example, you can express those ideas in a place which is invisible. Most of those seref from the first dynasty, for example, they are placed in locations that are not easy to access, and they are not easy to see when you are there. So you can wonder why putting the name of a king in a place where no one can easily see it. These questions are still pending. And I also very much like the recent work of Pavel Polkowski, who is probably one of the best specialists of rock art, Nilotic rock art today. And this concept of rock art in the landscapes of motion, because we tend to see rock art as something that cannot move in a landscape that never change. And it's the opposite. The landscape changed a lot. And this rock art, depending on who did it, on how many times it has been reactivated or deactivated, and depending on your own conceptions, when you see it, all of this can change from dramatically. And it adds some complexity in rock art studies, this approach, but it also opens a lot of new avenues of research. So people were moving, animals were moving, rock art was moving, frontiers were moving during the pre-dynastic quite a lot and quite regularly. But this changed with the formation of the state. The first kings and during the early dynastic periods, there's a need to somehow control this mobility of people, of groups, of different cultural affiliations. And rock art started to be used at that time as a means to extend a sphere of influences in the Nile Valley and outside of the Nile Valley, but also as a propaganda tool. So there's a lot of different changes during the fourth millennium as far as rock art is concerned. There's a lot of element to take into consideration. So it's very complex. But it's also very challenging, and it can also be of use when you are studying borderscapes. But this project of Maria also impacted the way rock art studies were done, because you are seeing rock art in with a different angle, in a different approach. And so it's a very fruitful exchange that we are currently doing with our respective projects. So thank you very much.